Greetings, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2026, Red Square no longer echoes with the clanking of tank tracks or fiery cheers. Instead, there is a gloomy atmosphere, extreme paranoia, and the shadow of drones hovering, ready to unleash their wrath at any moment. Vladimir Putin, once considered the architect of Russia's revival, is now facing a harsh reality. The social contract has officially collapsed. In this video, we will deeply analyze the irreparable cracks that have been smoldering within the Kremlin. The parade held in fear. Why did May 9th, 2026 become a bitter disappointment for Mr. Putin personally, when the air defense system was no longer a steel shield against the rise of Ukrainian drone technology? How did Ukraine strike at Russia's Achilles heel? Analyzing the attacks on oil refineries from Tuapse to Kirishi, eliminating the last lifeline of the Russian economy. Internal resistance from trusted lawyer Ilya Famuslo to influential celebrities. Why are Russia's elites and ordinary people no longer choosing to remain silent? The international chessboard is falling apart as Russia's closest allies, from Hungary and Iran to Mali, gradually turn their backs, and cooperation with China increasingly reveals itself as a risky relationship. Here is the content and detailed analysis. Vladimir Putin's time is running out, with a devastating blow to infrastructure in Kirishi. Ladies and gentlemen, even for a powerful and ambitious figure like Vladimir Putin, life sometimes finds meaning in the simplest things. It could be the familiar taste of his favorite fish soup, steaming hot pelmeni dumplings, or those rare relaxing moments with his 6 loyal dogs, diplomatic gifts from world leaders. And of course, there's the annual grand ceremony that can't be missed. The massive military parade at Red Square. Every year on May 9th, the Russian leader and international guests gather here to commemorate the Red Army's victory in World War II, where thousands of cadets march in perfect unison, hundreds of heavy weapons display their power, and the sky rumbles with the engines of dozens of fighter jets. However, in the current context, this grand holiday of Mr. Putin seems to be nothing more than a huge disappointment. There are no longer powerful military displays. The presence of foreign leaders has become sparse, and even the media space is tightly controlled. The reason is truly bitter. Despite their best efforts, the Russian military still cannot prevent the rain of drones from Ukraine falling right in the heart of Moscow. Vladimir Putin will have to face this year's May 9th in an unusually gloomy mood, like the image of a lonely politician lost in an empty amusement park. But the disappointment of that holiday is actually just a very small part of the mountain of trouble surrounding him. Internal sources from Russia are continuously sending out warning signals to Western observers. Putin is gradually becoming isolated. The political elite is gradually losing confidence. The Ukrainian military is making breakthroughs, and the patience of the Russian people is also running out. Russia's international standing is slipping out of the Kremlin's control. Some sources close to him even claim that Vladimir Putin is haunted by the risk of being overthrown in a coup, or even being assassinated by his own close associates. If you hear these things and feel skeptical because you're too familiar with similar scenarios in the past, that's understandable. However, there are valid reasons to believe that this time things will take a completely different turn. Russia's Victory Day celebration is scheduled for May 9th, but it will certainly only be a faint shadow of previous ones. Although no one can predict exactly what will happen on that day, if you are following this event, keep a close eye on Russia. The threats that Moscow faces on Victory Day are just symptoms of a much more serious illness. According to a long list of reports from Western media, confirmed by European intelligence agencies and Russian exile news channels, the Russian super-rich and elite are beginning to crack in their support for Putin's leadership. The issues causing this division have been simmering for a long time, from international sanctions, persistent economic pressure, to doubts about the military advisor's ability to manage the war. Everything really exploded at the end of last March, when Ilya Zemislov, a lawyer and a close associate of the Kremlin, suddenly made a shocking move. In a lengthy post on Telegram titled, "The Reasons Why I Stopped Supporting Vladimir Putin," Zemislov did not hesitate to criticize the attack on Ukraine, condemn the Kremlin for the economic damage caused to the country, and strongly opposed the restrictions on digital freedom. He bluntly declared that Vladimir Putin was no longer a legitimate president and demanded that he resign to face trial as a criminal. For anyone familiar with Russian internal politics, the only unusual thing is not the resistance itself, but the fact that until now, Zemyslov has not been silenced, falling from a high-rise building or having some rare accident involving radioactive tea. Though he was forcibly committed to a psychiatric facility for weeks, he showed no signs of submission after his release. According to expert Catherine Belton, Zemyslov is just a representative of a faction that is growing stronger inside the Kremlin, said to be led by Sergei Kiriyenko, the Kremlin's domestic policy chief and a figure tied to Russia's intelligence services. A long list of allies from the Kremlin to the oligarchs have lost faith in Putin's leadership. As Zemyslov noted, the situation recalls the Soviet Union's final days, when people were tired of the regime and did all they could to end it. Reports from the Financial Times and East Stories indicate that Putin is well aware of these challenges, and he is not taking them calmly. His inherent caution has turned into extreme paranoia. His security team has raised protection to an all-time high. Putin's staff are always under strict surveillance, even in their own homes. They are not allowed to use public transportation and are absolutely forbidden from bringing mobile phones or any internet-connected devices near him. The Russian leader now mainly lives in fortified underground bunkers, constantly moving between secret locations and avoiding residences in Moscow or the Northwest region. He only meets with a very small group of senior officials directly involved in the campaign in Ukraine, while many other deputies sometimes go an entire month without seeing him. His fear comes not only from Ukrainian drones that are penetrating deeper into Russian territory, but also from the specter of an internal coup. And Ilya Vymoslov is not the only one who dares to speak out publicly. Ordinary Russian citizens are also beginning to show resistance with a level of honesty and determination never seen before. Among them, Victoria Bornia, a highly influential figure living in Monaco, caused a stir when she released an 18-minute speech addressed directly to Putin, sharply criticizing his mistakes in running the country and triggering an unprecedented wave of public reaction. The wave of discontent is no longer just small sparks, but has flared up into a widespread fire as hundreds of Russian citizens have decided to follow Victoria Bornia's example and break their long-standing silence. They have flooded social media platforms to vent their frustrations about the endless raids on the cities. With widespread internet outages, a stagnant economy, and countless hardships that, under normal circumstances, no one would dare to mention out of fear. Public outcry has grown so loud that the Kremlin can no longer ignore it. Even Mr. Putin had to speak up and acknowledge the public's frustration over the digital paralysis, although he was quick to shift the blame to lower officials. All across the country, especially in major cities like Moscow, the shadow of the leader's paranoia and his efforts to tighten his grip on power are more evident than ever. Internal security forces are everywhere, checkpoints are mushrooming, and random arrests have become a part of daily life. Meanwhile, internet services are frequently disrupted, sometimes for days at a time, leaving people completely isolated, unable to contact loved ones, access medical or financial services, or even hear the state's propaganda broadcasts. In fact, these strict control measures are explained as a response to sabotage activities or the intrusion of drones from Ukraine. It appears the main impact has been on Russian citizens since the full-scale attack on Ukraine began. Mr. Putin and his close associates have been extremely careful to protect the wealthy urban class, especially ethnic Russians, from the direct costs of the war. But now that protective wall has collapsed, they can no longer hide the harsh reality, and preventing them from discussing it has become the only remaining option. Meanwhile, on the other side of the front, the Ukrainian forces in the spring of 2026 are making powerful advances. Although on the map the front lines have barely shifted and both sides are stuck in a brutal war of attrition, that stillness is merely a cover for a much deeper issue. Ukraine's drone technology has evolved dramatically, allowing them to strike deep into Russia's rear, completely disrupting the highly anticipated spring counteroffensive plans. Right on the front lines, the Russian army is paying a terrible price in lives just to gain a few meters of land. Worse for the Kremlin, Ukraine now has the ability to strike key economic targets deep inside Russia at will. From mid-April to early May, The vital Tuapse oil and gas export facility on the Black Sea suffered 4 consecutive attacks, causing severe damage to the refinery there. A similar situation also occurred in Novorossiysk. Not stopping there, Ukrainian drones began to devastate export facilities in the Baltic Sea, especially in Plymouth. And on Tuesday, May 5th, they attacked Russia's second-largest oil refinery in the town of Kirishi. Just 1 day earlier, Ukraine had demonstrated its ability to penetrate Moscow's most fortified defenses by striking a high-rise building right in the most strictly protected area. The message sent to Mr. Putin was extremely strong and clear, right before the parade. Although Mr. Putin had unilaterally declared a ceasefire on May 8 and 9 to avoid pressure, Ukraine responded by announcing an earlier ceasefire on May 5 and 6. Russia's subsequent attack on a kindergarten inadvertently gave Kiev a legitimate reason to reject all of Moscow's compromise efforts. Ukraine's strikes on energy infrastructure have destroyed Mr. Putin's last lifeline. The Russian leader once hoped to take advantage of the shocks in the global energy market caused by the conflict in Iran to pressure Western countries to lift sanctions and bring Russian oil back to the market. But now, even if some Western countries reluctantly agree to buy oil, Russia no longer has the ability to export it as its largest transit stations have been destroyed by Ukraine. Amid an already fragile economy, inflation has started to soar due to a severe labor shortage. For the first time, even Russian state-run polling agencies have had to admit a harsh reality. Support for Mr. Putin has dropped significantly, losing 10 percentage points in just 2 months. On the international stage, a tough exterior cannot hide the reality that Russia's position is rapidly declining. The arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by the United States dealt a heavy blow to Mr. Putin's mindset, forcing him to reconsider what his opponents are capable of. Russia's close allies are also falling into crisis. Cuba is under blockade and facing the risk of regime change, while the all-out war in the Middle East will leave Iran exhausted for decades to come. Countries in the Gulf that once sympathized with Russia are now placing their trust in Ukraine to protect themselves against a Russian ally. In Europe, Mr. Putin has lost the support of Hungarian leader Viktor Orban after he lost his position. Even in Africa, the situation is not any better as Mali, a country that used to receive direct military support from Russia, is being devastated by rebel attacks and is considering turning to Turkey for protection. China is still a partner for now, but both sides understand that in the long run, Russia is no longer an equal strategic ally, but just a juicy morsel on Beijing's table. All these turbulent developments are pushing Vladimir Putin into a dangerous endgame. The spiral of crisis is closing in on Vladimir Putin, and an inevitable question arises. Where will the breaking point be? What is the ultimate limit of endurance for an empire at its weakest moment? We can make rational predictions, but reality is never as simple as an equation. In geopolitical debates, observers often become obsessed with finding a silver bullet, a perfect weapon, or a decisive blow that could immediately end the Putin era. However, the real world is always more complicated and harsh than scenarios on paper. Even though Putin's power could be ended by a stroke or a betrayal from his own guard, history has shown that the most powerful dictators often fall due to the accumulation of mistakes and events that interact with each other in unpredictable ways. A power struggle among the elite breaks out just as a natural disaster strikes, or a local crisis erupts when the war has dragged on too long. Runaway inflation rages, and unrest from outside begins to seep deep into the motherland. Instead of a decisive gunshot, such leaders are often brought down by seemingly trivial things, or by the very problems they once managed to handle successfully in the past. This is exactly the kind of danger that Putin is facing. The situation now is no longer like in 2023, when only one mercenary leader boldly led his troops toward Moscow. At present, there are too many variables getting out of control at the same time, too many cracks appearing all at once. In the past, Putin has overcome life and death moments when it seemed like the whole world turned its back on him, and he was always the final winner. But in all those times, Putin possessed a supreme advantage that he no longer has now, which was the absolute trust from the elite. The Russian military and people believed that he always had a genius plan to lead the country through storms. Now that aura is fading. Geopolitical expert Tatiana Stanovasa has pointed out that skepticism is eroding Russia's confidence. People are starting to wonder if there is really a plan, or if it's just a blind stubbornness leading to political destruction and loss of life for those who follow him. The social contract that has been the foundation of Putin's power for decades is being torn apart in an unprecedented way. During his reign, Putin promised the oligarchs huge profits and protection as long as they stayed out of politics. He promised the Russian people a stable and secure life as long as they did not interfere in government affairs. The elites and the people kept their part of the deal. They remained silent and obedient, but Putin failed to fulfill his promise. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that the West is eager to witness the downfall of a figure they see as a ruthless manipulator, the one who started the senseless war in Ukraine. Because of that desire, rumors about health, palace intrigues, or Ukrainian attacks are often exaggerated and take on a dramatic life of their own. People are now used to waves of speculation, but nothing ever changes. Putin has always overcome every specter around him, or maybe those specters never existed. Maybe in a few years, when we look back at this conversation, we'll see that it was just wishful thinking. But if there is one most reliable sign of a turning point in history, it is exactly what we are witnessing. Not just the cracks in the security system or the collapse of the economy, but the fact that the Russian people themselves are choosing to tear up the social contract. They are doing this because they believe the contract has been betrayed, and the betrayer is not them. Putin's position has always been based on a contract of closely tied interests. But if things continue as they are now, he will soon become a burden that Russia can no longer bear. The contract will soon be discarded. From your perspective, does Putin still have any trump cards to turn the situation around in 2026? Or are we truly witnessing the final chapters of an empire?